Good afternoon. The subject for today's webcast is quotations and estimates. Now, what we'd like to do is set the scene a little bit by what do we consider to be quotations and estimates, and then go through a couple of worked examples. My name is Frank McLaughlin. I'm the Vice President of the Business Solutions Group for Epicor International, and I'll be taking you through this particular webcast. So quotations and estimates, the fundamental starting point of either making a profit or making a loss. If we quote correctly, we can make a profit. If we don't quote correctly, we'll either make a loss or not make a profit by overpricing and losing the opportunity for business. Let's have a look. We want to deal with customers and prospects. We want to understand what people are thinking about, what they want to do, why they're dealing with us. We want that information recorded in the system, and we want to be able to share that and nurture the opportunities along. We want to be able to give people quotes for standard parts, those things that they might buy more than once, or make to order specials, make to order, assemble to order, configure to order, unique one-off bespoke items. And for kits, those things that may be a collection of parts that don't actually require any additional manufacturing, but they do all come together probably at the customer side. In this, we need multiple price breaks because if I'm making one of something, then the setup costs and setup times would really lift the price. Whereas if I'm buying 10, 50, 100, 5,000 of something, I can get significant price breaks. And being able to do that within the quoting process allows us to then negotiate with customers on the optimum point of quantity versus cost. We want workflows to control the tasks, both internal and external, escalations, authorizations, controls, and that sort of thing. We want to log our contact with people. We want to look at the competitors. We want to be able to manage that within one unified environment. Got to have call logs. We're discussing quotes and requirements, assessing people's feelings about the quotes. So having a call log, very sensible. We want to be able to copy specials from somewhere else. It's the same as the one you did last year, but only in a different color. It's the same as the standard model that I get, but I want it painted rather than unpainted. I want it with bigger wheels or smaller wheels. I want it with one special feature or another. I want to be able to do it from an existing or previous quote. I want to be able to do it from a job. I've manufactured this for you before. Yes, I'd like that again. So imagine you've done one quote, you've created a job off the back of that as a prototype. Now they want to have that same item done again, exactly how it was done through the job, which may be different than how it was quoted. And as I said before, standard repeat items with a slight variation. Do a cost roll-up. I need to know how much it's going to cost me so I can justify how I'm going to sell it. The ideal circumstance is I convert the quote directly to an order and the job. If I am in a consumer-driven world where I want what I want and it may be different to what everybody else wants, then I may be in a situation where I only make this item once. And I don't need to have a historic engineering controlled bill of materials and routing because the information was captured during the quoting process. I want to measure pipeline, confidence factors. I want to be able to report to management that these are the sorts of forecasts that we're going to have. When I do create a sales orders, is it a discrete sales order? I just need to do things like straight up over the counter if I'm doing a kit. I need to be able to control dispatch and invoice details from the quote through the sales order process and the billing that goes with it. Maybe I need to do multiple lines because I've done multiple lines in the quote. Maybe I need to do single drop orders or multiple line orders. All these things could be controlled within one quote or multiple quotes depending on circumstance. That then brings us into the concept of project sales. The difference between a simple quotation and bidding and estimating is that in a simple quotation, you're doing a quotation for a single element, a single manufactured or assembled product and or service. Whereas in a project, you may be looking at multiple phases, multiple products, installation and commissioning, varieties of elements, and you may take those out and drop those out into bid teams that are experts in their own separate areas. So against a project, you could have multiple quotes, driving multiple sales orders off those quotes, all linked to the same project, with the potential of them being different billing methods. I may want to do billing methods for projects, time and material, fixed fee. I may want to do some elements on delivery of product. I want to do some on the basis of milestones. So the system needs to allow me to break up the body of work into estimating groups that is then taken through and done out into sales orders against a singular project with billing methods that suit the type of work, the type of service, the type of product that's being delivered in that phase of the project. Maybe that we are quoting for a longer-term repetitive product in a, say, automotive context, where we actually want to take that quote across to create sales contracts. So volume manufacture, things like automotive scheduling, where you're looking at defining a contract quote, defining products covered by that contract, being able to then have recurring schedules. So your schedule of consumptions, proposed call-offs, etc., being able to look at the current schedule, but also looking at historical schedules. One of the KPIs that works within contract sales, especially in automotive, is the variation between one schedule call-off and the next schedule call-off and the impacts that has on your manufacturing facility, on your entire supply chain. So just as you can do quotes and estimates controlled in different manners, there are different outputs for that to run through. So the whole idea of a sales contract is I want multiple lines for multiple parts, multiple schedules, historic views, current views, proposed views. That proposed schedule, does it actually balance off against where I'm calling? I need to reconcile that, I need to review that, I need to approve that, and then I need to update the planning environment. Manufacturing setup is an important element of the quoting process. We look at resource groups, in this case, let's say a printer for labels or that sort of thing. That resource group has particular setup costs and running costs. In an Epicor environment, you can set up what the real costs are versus the quoting costs if I want to build in some contingency for variation going forward. So I could be looking at setting up the resource group, multiple resources within that group, multiple capabilities of those resources and the impact of those on the operation of printing. So I need some someone from the setter group at a particular rate for quoting. I need a particular tool, jig, or fixture. I need to have a certain capability. All of those have cost implications to the manufacturing, and they need to be then considered when I'm doing my quote, because if I don't quote in real terms, I'm not going to be able to see my way clearly through to a recurring and predictable profit line. Now, quotations impact on supply chain. Now, most people are comfortable with the concept that I have an engineering environment that allows me to predefine my part and method of manufacture, the materials that are required to produce that product, the operation steps and timings that are done. But what if you're working in an environment where you're offering customers variation? Where does that method of manufacture come from? So I said, in a typical context, the job method is derived from the part's standard method of manufacture. But if I'm looking at product variation, shouldn't I actually get the method of manufacture for the product from the quote itself? Why would I have multiple instances of bills of materials and routings, methods of manufacture, cluttering my database, when I'm going to be making bespoke products from a common theme with a common set of rules all the time? Now, if it works out that I'm quoting for a new product which is going to be a long-term stable product, the first thing that will happen is that most often people will want to see a prototype. So the quote method can be drawn across to the job method. You can check out the part, and then you can induce the method of manufacture from either the template created from the quote or the template created from the job after execution. So you have three methods of drawing that together, saying, well, I quoted it like this. They asked for a prototype, so I went, executed the job. That was successful. They now want to buy 10,000 over the next year. Do they want it based on the template from the quote, or through manufacture, did we actually learn more about that item? And that's part of the purpose of a prototype. And potentially this is the second, third, fourth, fifth prototype before you get the final version of that product that's signed off. So in an Epicor environment, you can have template from a quote, template from a job, feeding into the engineering workbench, and that can then be sent to define the part method going forward, which will then become the baseline for the ongoing product if you are doing repeat business. So you can do one-off bespokes, you can do prototypes, you can take the information from the prototype, either from the quote for the prototype or for the job that completed that prototype, and make that the permanent method of manufacture after adjustment by the engineering team if they thought that was appropriate. So nothing is lost in your understanding and learning about the products that you're selling. From a purchasing environment, from the quotation environment, you can go out and request for quotations from suppliers for new materials. Those materials that you don't currently buy, or you want to recheck the price because it's been some time since you've been buying it. That would include one-off materials, materials that are unique to this particular quote and you'll not use again. Perhaps you want to run it through a requisition process just to control that. Purchase orders allow you to look for standard stock, parts purchased directly to the job. So these are standard items that are involved in a particular quote which creates a job, You need to buy them directly for it because of some sort of strategic purpose. On the fly parts that have been defined during the quoting process that you don't think you are ever going to use again, and you are going to consume fully, or at least cost fully, into the manufacture of an item when you are creating the quote. Of course, you can do subcontract operations, you can do drop ships of materials to subcontractors for processing to bring back in. Overhead and non-stock materials for cleaning products and stuff like that. You can also do customer supplied materials. So part of the quoting process may be that your customer is going to supply a portion of the end product because they have sourcing for that, and you need the ability to be able to confirm the time frame for that delivery, physical acceptance of those materials, and then inclusion into the product that is then being shipped back to the customer. So it provides you with that complete audit link. And of course, supplier consignment. So if you do get to that long-term repeat use sales contract, perhaps you've been able to arrange supply consignment stock for some of those materials. Multiple lines, multiple releases, purchase contracts, back-to-back, sales contracts, purchase contracts, because the sales contract may have been on the basis of a particular quantity of material at a particular time, and you want to do a back-to-back contract to make sure your costs are under control. Kanban replenishment, supplier sourcing, the whole price, lead time, effectivity, proved and primary, and this information all feeds into the quoting process. I need to know my sourcing arrangements so I can understand my costs, so I can understand what I'm going to price it at. As we said, you could be looking at projects. Now, the project is things like engineering phases, manufacturing phases, maybe installation and commissioning phases. Now, these could all be engaged by different quotes, multiple lines on multiple quotes, all focused to an end point. Those multiple quotes could all go into the hands of different bidding teams, all controlled under a single project, all contributing to the ultimate cost of that project. And then when you win the project, ultimately feeding into the jobs and or purchase orders that are required to execute those, plus the sales orders that are required to allow for the various forms of billing mechanisms that you have, so you can see the project costs and the project revenue all tied into one. Of course, during review of projects, you would be wanting to see what was quoted, what's the actual been to date, and from that, your extrapolated costs. What's my cost to complete? What's my cost at completion? What's my variation at completion versus quoted? What's my variation at completed versus budget? You can have different. And this can cover labour hours and costs, materials, indirect costs, subcontract costs, purchase order costs that aren't related to materials, miscellaneous costs, and adjustments. Now, feeding in all this information to the business intelligence environment allows you to look for extensive KPIs, reports and graphs, views of the information with detail, drill down, drill through, data warehousing, if there's reports, additional views, perspectives you want to gain on your quoting process versus anything else. You can have your additional reports, your graphical drill down and views, your additional business views, and they're all available to embed in the Epicor 10 homepage. So things like quote status, pipeline values, pipeline counts, open quotes at stages, lead ratings, sales versus plan, sales quantity versus plan, daily sales and bookings, daily stock levels. Drill down and look at the information in a grid manner. Break it out by sales of geography, by product group, by rep. Or the forecast, because you've got the quotes in the system, you're maturing them through, you can see the predicted future cash impacts. What am I going to buy? What's the difference in time between expected procurement and expected return? Look at your KPIs, all the information for quoting and estimating, feeding through sales, feeding through operations and everything else, feeding up into the KPIs. What am I doing from my top 10, top 5 customers, my top 5 parts? How's my order price versus quantities? What are my monthly order values? How are they looking? Now let's have a look at a couple of examples of the quotes in action. One of the first things I might want to look at is a view of pipeline analysis. So I want to see all the quotes that are currently out there with their confidence levels, and has it been officially quoted, what hasn't been quoted. So potentially what I want to do is group and say, what have I quoted and what's still in the process of being quoted? Why haven't I actually finalized that quote and sent that quote through to the customer? When was it due? What's its current stage? How am I processing it? If I'm looking at those that have been quoted, what's my confidence? From high to low? Or do I want to use the system and say, well, actually give me some summaries. What I want to see is my average confidence level. Have a look at that. My average confidence level of all my active quotes at the moment is 60%. Why am I looking at only 60% confidence? What can I do to lift that? Why am I there? If I then want to take that and say, well, break out the different tasks and say, okay, I've got 4 different stages in my process. Confidence at contacting the prospect and getting information is 40%. Doing needs analysis, the confidence improves to 60%. I'm waiting for the quote acceptance, 70%. But then I get to my win-lose and I start to wonder why that deal hasn't been taken up yet. And perhaps that's when I start to lose a little bit of confidence. And that affects forecastable revenues and that sort of thing. I want to see a focus on funnel. I want to see focus on different views of the data. Perhaps what I want to do is actually, I'll just put a legend on this, park it on the right side, break that out. Well, this is where everything is in the stage-wise. If I wanted to then break that out differently, change the style of graph, I could certainly do that. I want percentage value, or how about percentage and label? I want to break it all out. Anything less than, yeah, I don't need that. So perhaps I want to look at my information that way and say it's win or lose. If I've got that, do I need my legend? Probably not. So 66% of my quotes are currently sitting at win or lose. Only 13.5% are at contacting the prospect. let's have a look at doing a quote itself. Now, quoting an existing product is easy. I just go through and say, I'm going to have a quote, and customer Addison, that's fine. Give me a new quote number. And from the defaults, it picks up my tasks and my workflow. Can I vary that? Of course. Establish customers. Pick various parts if I want to go through custom designed parts instead. Refresh that. I have many more tasks to do because this is a unique part, and I need to spend more time, more effort, more sales dollar on working those through. So again, depending on the part, depending on the circumstance, depending on the quote, will depend on the tasks that are actually there. Do I want to look at the people that are involved, the contacts we're working with, the salespeople involved, commission splits, the competitors, who are we competing against, and what do we need to be careful about? And back to the sort of summary information, which is going to allow us to do things like best case, worst case, and our confidence level. When do we expect to close? Always an interesting question for a salesperson to be asked. So now I can, if I expect to close it by the end of April, I can work through my pipeline analysis and that sort of thing. So let's do a quote for a particular item that is much the same as something I've made before, but not quite the same. That subtle difference that sometimes comes in to what people want. And I want one of those. How am I going to make that? Well, let's see how I go. Am I manufacturing? Let's look at my manufacturing details. I need to get the details of how I'm going to make that, and I get the details. Do I get the details from a job that's currently in process or has historically been processed, a previous quote that's been done for this, or an item similar, or from a method of manufacture that exists for a fairly standard item that I'm going to use as the basis for this? And which revision of that item am I actually going to use? So when I pull that in, it's now showing me all the information that exists regarding the part that I brought in under the new part number. So would I want those attachments? I can set so I can either leave those attachments on or off depending on their circumstance. This is controlled through sub-assemblies. There's assembly operations and there are materials that exist. So, right, in this particular circumstance, I have materials and I have 5/16 bolts and everything else. But what if I actually want to put some different materials on there? So engineering materials, maybe I want to do 5/16. So do I actually want 5/16 and a nylon washer and a bolt? And do I want to take all those and drop those on to the item? Because they're the items that I want to put on. Do I want to take those off or these additional materials? Again, it's my particular choice. So I can work these through as much as I actually need to. So if I then go through and say, I want to now add a new material, this is something I haven't done before. Say paint, red, custom. Customers, red, paint, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to estimate that I'm going to need 2 litres per, and it's going to cost me about $10. Now, I could have gone off and said that this is going to require quotation and everything else, but I've got a good relationship with my paint company and I know that that's all valid and that's perfectly fine, but they've said a special colour will actually take me 5 days. Now, what I need is an operation. From engineering, I need an operation and search up that operation on the basis of something like paint. There you go. I want painting. So I can grab that operation and park that in. I can assemble it and then I can paint it. And for the quote details for that operation of painting, do I want to do pieces per hour, fixed hours, hours per each, etc. Let's do hours per. Let's do 2 hours. Let's say that the setup is an additional hour and save that out. That's now moved away from the standard manufacturing concept through to a painted item with some custom paint and some different fasteners. How much is that going to cost? There's my worksheet. It's going to take 8 hours to set up, but only 3.5 hours to make. So each of those units, if I made one only at a time, is going to cost $2,084. Yes, I could have the system nominate the unit price, or I say, well, I actually think the customer can stand a little bit more there, so I'm going to say, I'm going to charge them $2,200 for that. But what I might want to do is say, okay, if I give you a price quantity break and I'm talking about making 10 of these, let's have a look at the worksheet for that. The price has now dropped to $583. So now what I want to do is I'll make those $600 each. Well, that's good if it's 10. What happens if I say, well, give me another one. Let's go to 100. Let's look at the worksheet for the 100. It only comes down from 583 to 448. With the amount of time versus setup, doesn't break out that much, so it becomes $450 each. So I really do need to look at it and say, well, here I am. And if I'm looking at the detail here, if I buy one, it's $2,200. If I buy 10, it's $600. If I buy 100, it's $450. Now, from my cash flow purposes and sales and everything else, I may think that 10 is the optimum price point. If I want to run engineering approval past this, I can run engineering approval past it, and that's fine. If I then want to look at it and say, well, what do I think my confidence factor is? How many do I expect to get? Now I actually expect to get 10. And I think my best case in this circumstance, you'll see that the potential values changed. My best case is 90%. My worst case is 70. My current confidence is sitting somewhere at about 80%. So if I want to project cash flows on the basis of best, worst, and confidence, I can then see that if I'm doing my upside, I'm quoting $5,400. If I'm wanting to be conservative, I can say $4,200, and what I really expect is 48. Now, the logical question that the customer is going to ask you, especially once you've gone and quoted it. I could say this is an A, B, or C grade rating when it comes to it, because this is a long-term customer, etc., etc. Will be, okay, what if I ordered 10 for you to start today, schedule it finitely, consider the material constraints. Can you tell me when you think I could sensibly expect to get that material? So what's the system doing at the moment? It's looking at the operations requirements and materials requirements that you've got. It's looking at the existing schedule and commitments that you've got and coming back to you faster than I can explain it and says, actually on the 12th of April is when you can have this. That's the best we can do under current circumstances. Okay, great. I'm happy with that. So what I'd like to do now, please, is I'd like to confirm the order for this part that didn't exist. It's a variation of something, but in essence, it didn't exist. So I'm going to make that for the 14th, because that will do me, that's fine. And yes, I'm going to have 10. Yes, it's going to pick up the price. So could I go and create the order and the job? What the system is now allowing me to do is say, yeah, I want to create a job get the details from it, and I want to schedule it. In rapid response environments that's suitable, you could even release the job to operations, but that becomes a choice of a business as opposed to an. So I could quote you something that we haven't made before, but we have the parts available, etc., etc. It works within our rules of configuration for that, and I can go through and have that out and released on the floor within a matter of minutes. So that's one way of doing this particular work. And we'll move into a different format, because that's going to create the sales order and the job, and we'll see all that in a minute. Minimize this. What if I then say, actually, what I'll have is, can I have a new quote? Oops, I have to close my order job wizard down. Okay, so that particular quote's been won. So let's look at another variation of that. So let's just clear this out, and let's have another quote for a different material. Let's do it potentially for the same customer. In this particular circumstance, what we want to look at is, what if there are some rules? We make a different product every time. We supply a different product all the time. So what happens if I want to have rules around the configuration of, say, server equipment? And in this particular case, I'm going to look to buy just one server, and I'd like to configure that. So instead of having to take the concept of same as something else we've designed and modify its bill of material and routing on the fly, why not just create a bill of configuration and say, okay, for a particular type of server, let's say the essential server, and I want to look at the SC440, yes, that's what it looks like. Okay, what kind of memory do I want? Let's go 2 GB. Say to controller, how many disks do I want to put in? A couple of decent sized disks. And you can see it's starting to build up the price. I get a free upgrade, different bits. Okay, now move that along. Okay, operating system. Do I want, which operating system do I want on? Well, let's go 2008. cheap. Do I want petitioning? Yeah, okay, let's go 40 gig. Let's go a Vault. That's what's available. Let's go back up. Gives me the details of what I'm getting, gives me the total price. Save that down. And if I look at the line and the manufacturing details, I can say, right, what I want you to do is get the details, and you get the details on the basis of this is the material, this is the item, and the selections that I've made during the configuration process. I don't want to reconfigure them at this point, but I could reconfigure it if I want. And it says, these are the operations that are required. These are the materials that are required. So installation, and you can vary the operations and the materials. This is the worksheet saying how much it's all going to cost. You can see how it's priced it out for me. So again, in the first instance, we said, you can set it to say, here's the recommended price, you adjust the price. In this case, it's a case of this is the recommended price, and this is what I want you to quote out, because that then gives you variation and space. And you can go through the whole workflows and everything else. At the same time, you can say, yep, this is all approved because these are all the details of what's going to go in it. We're happy with that. The quote itself is happy. All part of the workflow. And for the quote, once you go and create the sales order, it's assembly, so you can have it next week. And go and do the order job wizard, which creates the sales order and the job to get it all out there. It comes up and says yes. If I had multiple lines, I could select them all, I could do that, and I could release the job itself, and I could just go and create the job to go get that server assembled, and everything would be fine. I could give that server new part number, I could configure the part number, I could configure the description on the fly, I could do the lot. If I then wanted to go through and say, well, you know, can you show me where that fits on the job scheduling board, I could do that. And see that this is all worked through the process. It would be going in and saying, here's the job. These are the assembly steps. This is when they're going to take place. Any materials that needed to be brought in would be brought in for them. It's all going to satisfy the dates to be available again for the 7th. So the options are, when you're doing quoting, to go through and either have same as, except for, build from scratch, configure, work through the process flows, work through the quoting flows, work through the task lists, look at responsibilities, time frames, everything else, look at the summaries. All this information is feeding into pipeline analysis, win-loss analysis, materials forecasting, production forecasting, cash flow forecasting, because it's all part of the system. With larger projects, you can do partially configured, you can do bid teams and estimates. And that then leads through to where I want to go, profitability analysis, bookings charts, service ratings, because if you quote it right, you can execute it right, you can do it profitably. And that's what we're ultimately all about. Thank you for your time. I hope you found that interesting. and look forward to your contact. Have a great day.